Hello, welcome to the 65th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to discuss science and how I think or believe that science is going to evolve further um, as it is linked more and more and inspires itself from the teachings of spirituality and how we can advance on this journey. So maybe just a quick recap. One of the things that will need to be transcended if we are to evolve from science into something else is to get rid of, or at least really blur the lines between the true false duality. Right now, science is very much stuck on this duality, the belief that the external world, that there is an external truth outside of yourself, and that we were just gradually via experiences getting closer and closer to this truth which exists and is just there waiting for us like a static thing, a holy grail of truth. And through the advances of science, we're just zeroing in on that truth. Whereas what I believe is that we're just making it up as we go along. Basically, it's like an operating system. We're just adding new functionalities. We're keeping the sort of we're of course not changing too much the root code. Like, for instance, we're not reinventing gravity. We don't see objects floating around on Earth magically. But you add to it and add to it and add to it until you're capable of doing things that are deemed magic, but that you can reverse engineer and explain to yourself because of the way you've updated your interface in your operating system. So, for instance, if we invent an anti-gravity device, then suddenly objects can float around. But of course, you can explain it because there's some formulas and some math and whatever to justify why that could actually materialize as an experience in your reality. And it's just basically the science, the way that it works right now is just, the little, I call them the little wheels that you put on the side of a bike to avoid falling over when you're learning how to ride it. And then you're gradually sort of removing them to ride more freely. And that's what all beliefs are ultimately, whether it is religions, monotheist religions, or science, or spirituality for that matter. It is just steps to free the mind to a level where it can actually experience more and more and more things without completely mixing everything together and mingling everything together. I'm not going to go into certain other discussions that I want to also talk about in the next videos, like, for instance, dimensions, and the fact that ultimately in the singularity, or maybe I'll just quickly touch upon that, all dimensions are compressed into one, but as sort of the singularity reverse engineers itself, sort of, or experiences itself, those dimensions start separating. But that only happens progressively. And so if you go back in the past and you hear these crazy stories about dragons and aliens visiting the planet 10,000 years ago and all kinds of things, why are they not here now? It's because if you take a sneak peek into the past, dimensions were sort of layered one on top of the other and mixed together, kind of. And as time goes by, because those dimensions sort of learn from each other by being in contact with each other, they're saying, oh, wait a minute, you should be up here and I should be down here. And what are you doing here? Maybe you should be here and you should be here. And then that sort of arranges much more logically. And the contact and the interactions of one dimension with the other is much less chaotic, and there are actual steps required to go from one to the other. Think about it as notes on a piano, where imagine if those notes were really, really close together. really, really close together, and you had to play with it, play on those notes with one giant finger, like this is your finger. Well, chances are you'd hit all those notes at once. And so all of these notes would sort of come to your experience at the same time, and it would be kind of chaotic. And that's your stories of, aliens planting, seeding life on the planet and all that stuff. But as time goes by, those dimensions, because they sort of have a consciousness attached to each of them, they're saying, wait a minute, you shouldn't be here. You should be up there. You're very high vibrational, so you should be here. And then this other note says, oh, yeah, I'm high vibrational, but you're very low vibrational. You should be right here. This should be your note. And so humanity and aliens kind of, everything sort of falls back into place. There are also these stories where you find the trace of a footstep of a man and that of a T-Rex, and that the creationists are using that as proof that man and dinosaurs walked the earth at the same time. Well, maybe they did in the past, a past where dimensions were one layered on top of each other, but then as time goes by, it sort of all sorted itself out, and then the dinosaurs roamed the planet here from the like billions of years ago, and then humanity came, and you have this very nice gradual story, just like going up a piano scale, as opposed to before, where all of that was sort of compressed into one, and everything was mingled together. So it's as if you threw all kinds of, like, think of all the dimensions as puzzles, each being like puzzles, and each of the pieces, you attach a consciousness to each of those pieces of the puzzle, and then you throw them in one big bag, which is what happens when you go from the singularity to experiencing itself. Why would it experience itself in an orderly fashion? How could it even know the concept of orderly? It doesn't exist. And so you have to start everywhere, and when you start everywhere, if you throw all those pieces of puzzles into one big bag and you attach a consciousness to it, then they interact with each other, and they just simply figure out, just like basically when you throw rocks and sand and stuff in a bottle and then shake it up, the sand sort of sinks to the bottom and the big rocks are stuck up at the upper end of the bottle. Well, imagine that the singularity does the same thing. It expresses itself everywhere at the same time, but then those pieces of puzzle sort of, by interacting with each other, saying, hey, wait a minute, this makes no sense. You should be down here. Oh yeah, and I should be up here. And then you can build this gradual, nice little linear story, which is our 3D reality, our the story of the Big Bang and linear time, and all of these nice little things is simply the result not of us uncovering an eternal truth, but simply the natural sorting mechanism and process of the nice ordering of all those dimensions through experience and this feedback, where the universe sort of learns more and more about itself by interacting with itself, sometimes in a chaotic fashion. And the people that are hard bent on saying that the alien creation story is the truth don't understand this, because it's like saying that when you first poured the sand and the rocks and everything into the bottle, before you shook it up, that was the truth, and once you shake it up, that's no longer the truth, that's made up. And the reverse is also equally stupid, to think that the final way that the bottle sort of organized these things is the absolute truth. Neither of them are true, and all of them are true, and both of them are true. So, true versus false duality. So it wasn't necessary, I guess, to do another video on dimensions. I hope that was clear. Maybe I'll do a more detailed video on dimensions and dimensional mixes and how they sort of. But here, let's press on. So, first, a little bit of background and history. So, science has to move past true versus false in order to evolve, and that's what spirituality and the videos that I'm doing, I think, will help science move forward. Because it's not because you stop viewing the world as an external truth that you lose all sense of order and the physical reality, and you start of like you become God and omnipotent and whatnot. It's just about what strategy we decide upon on removing gradually these wheels that are limiting us in our experience. And that is completely different. It doesn't mean like, oh, the wheels on the bike, they're all an illusion. Let's throw them out to the fire and let's all just fly away like this is a big dream and do whatever we want. That would be catastrophic. The same as if you took out your 4-year-old that just barely knows how to ride without her wheels and said, "Hey, have fun on the highway." Totally irresponsible. But there are different steps that you can take between, riding on that bike on your terrace in your backyard, which is basically what we're doing here on our planet. We're sort of riding on our own little tiny piece of planet amongst the billions and billions and billions of planets in the universe. And now we're trying to figure out how we're going to make the transition between riding our bike pretty much safely, even if we're doing plenty of stupid things on our terrace on our little planet, how we're going to ride that bike when we go suddenly into the street and we're starting to meet other kids, that is, other alien civilizations, for instance. How are we going to go about this? And so to put basically science into a broader context and how spirituality sort of helps here to put this growth of our consciousness into a higher perspective, I like to think about this as being what religions brought to humanity. This is what science brought to humanity, for instance, one of the things at least. And this is what spirituality is going to bring to humanity. And each of them is really important. For instance, what did religions, like, for instance, the Ten Commandments, bring to humanity? It's what I call impulse hygiene. Impulse hygiene is basically you are an evolved chimp, and yet you still have those animal instincts and impulses, like, for instance, being violent and killing some people at a whim with no bad conscience about it. Because if you have that impulse, you just act on that impulse. And there is no concept of good and evil yet. And if you want a woman, then you just take her. If you can, if you're physically strong enough, you just do it. And you had all these primitive civilizations where you had very barbaric practices like human sacrifice and a lot of violence. Of course, violence didn't disappear after religions, but I would say that still religions created a label of evil and good, which was basically an impulse hygiene. It is a way to put a lid on impulses in order to be able to control yourself and your impulses gradually as we move forward as a civilization. First, you do it via fear of a wrathful God that's going to punish you and you're going to burn in hell for all eternity if you rape your neighbor's wife or you kill your neighbor. And so that sort of was a sort of like a kick in the butt to the evolved chimp that we were to move their consciousness a bit forward via a certain strategy, which you might or might not think was good, but nevertheless, we are no longer behaving like chimps, so that's a good thing overall. Then science brought what I call physical hygiene or material hygiene. And every time you have challenges, like religions were the challenge to animal-like behavior. Animal-like behavior, violence, ultra-violence, rape, murder, all things which still existed, of course, after religions came along, but with the addition of remorse, repentance, this idea that your deed actually was quote unquote bad, which before it had no label, it just was. You just killed someone and that's it, and you wouldn't think twice about it, just like you wouldn't think twice about eating a sandwich or looking outside the window. And but then religions faced a new challenge, and that was here, for instance, like the Black Plague in the 14th, 15th century in Europe, and all kinds of cataclysms and traumatizing events that religion was simply ill-equipped to answer. And so you have at every point you have basically people that are no longer adequate. Like for instance, the shamans in 10,000 years ago, and these animal-like were incapable of keeping this animal-like behavior in check, and so you had monotheist religions that emerged on top of that. And then religions were completely ill equipped to deal with some of these occurrences, like the Black Plague. And your local priest could pray and send all the prayers that they wanted to your household. You would still die. And then science comes along and says, well, what if you wash up? What if you have a better bodily hygiene? And it sort of turned the human consciousness to take care of external things, take care of, and it invented the concept of germs and explaining sort of reality and putting a certain code of how to behave in order to face certain challenges, like the Black Plague, for instance. And so it's the people that started to wash regularly, clean their houses, that were best protected against things like this, against, for instance, things that before they thought was a curse or a punishment from God, like a bad, um, 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 well, any kind of bad event, for instance, catastrophe that would happen, and that they would before think it was, just the wrath of God. And now science, of course, the scientific priests, which are the scientists, are now dealing with COVID. And if you look at, for instance, the statistics from Sweden or other countries and about how many people died to the 100,000, they're basically very, very comparable, actually. And so science today faces the same kind of limits that the priests faced when dealing with the Black Plague. No matter how much physical hygiene you actually put in practice, no matter how much you try to control the physical environment, what is the next level and what spirituality brings is mental hygiene. And when I mean mental hygiene, I mean your thoughts. Fear, for instance. How much are you afraid of COVID, the coronavirus? And I think gradually we'll come to recognize that the placebo nocebo effect and spirituality and the mental hygiene are the next step in science for science. Um, and you see that we didn't abandon prayer entirely, and we didn't abandon our physical reality entirely, but we're integrating all of these levels, just like in spiral dynamics, which I invite you to Google. Spiral dynamics, really important piece of work that integrates rather than transcends, and integrates and transcends rather than moves from something false to something true, like moving from religion to science and from science to spirituality. You integrate all of them. So mental hygiene. In the placebo, for instance, there are very interesting things happening. Like, for instance, a test of a chemotherapy treatment, and you do a placebo, and you take like 100,000 people, 50,000 people receive a dud, so a fake chemotherapy, and 50,000 receive the true one. And funnily enough, the people that receive the fake one, because they are not sure whether it's the actual chemotherapy, if they believe it's the chemotherapy, they start losing their hair, for instance, when there's actually no chemical justification or scientific justification or a chemical kind of process or reaction to justify the fact that they're losing their hair. There isn't a molecule that they've been injected that can be deemed responsible for losing their hair, but they make it happen to themselves simply through their mental state, their belief, their thoughts. And so the countries that are most scared of the coronavirus and your mental state when facing reality, when facing the outside challenges, is the next progress, the next step where we can make progress as humanity. We don't ditch science entirely. We won't run in front of a car just because we're completely deluded and saying, oh, if I believe that this car won't hurt me and I'm very happy dandy, nothing will happen. No, you've integrated the science thing. You're not completely out of your mind, but you understand that your mental hygiene, which spirituality can help you with, is responsible for aggravating certain things, making certain things worse, and can protect you from certain things that science thought would affect everyone in a similar way, just because, science doesn't think that, well, science thinks in terms of billiard balls and cause and effect, and not in terms of the power of the mind over the body, for instance. And that's what spirituality is going to bring into the picture. And that's why we have this COVID challenge and the coronavirus challenge right now, is that just like the Black Plague, just like all kinds of other challenges that humanity is facing, we're seeing, all of us, we're seeing science fail us in the sense that they're going to try to vaccinate, they're going to try to control, they're going to try to control the physical aspects of everything. And ultimately, they will scare people like they're scaring everybody right now with the mass media. They're always talking about the bad news, not the good news, which will actually defy which will counteract the beneficial effects of whatever drugs and whatever other measures they're implementing. And so it's a battle between controlling the physical and the material world, and the mental being so scared that it actually counteracts any positive measures that you put in place in the physical. And of course, that's just the way that I see this evolution. And then there's the experiences, how science is going to move forward. Now, of course, there is going to be, in my mind, many more experiments that should be devised to measure the influence of the observer on reality. And what do I mean by this? Well, in my interpretation of things, the uncertainty principle, I think it's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, what we're measuring there is our own free will, because the only thing that is not determined, or the most undetermined in the room when you're observing an atom, is your own reaction. Because matter around you has no idea how the crazy person that you are, is going to act at any point in time in the future, for instance, whether you're going to raise your hand, shout, scream, jump, then it has no idea how it will be affected, and therefore that's why there is a sort of a cloud of possibilities around what it prepares itself to become as a potential, based on how you're going to affect matter around you, because of course every single one of your actions reverberates all around you into infinity, even at the infinitely small level. Like any impulse that you give, even through the air now, like when you're waving your hand around, that has a knock-on effect. Well, just like the butterfly effect, where one air molecule hits another air molecule, hits another air molecule, and ultimately that reverberates into infinity. Even if it's in the infinitely small, it's still an influence, a way to influence everything around you. And so, one experiment that you can try to put in place is for, let's say, regroup a large number of people together and do two experiments. Like you have 1,000 people that promise to do something unexpected. Like, for instance, they're really like spontaneously, like try not to think of what to do and then just do whatever comes to mind at the point in time. And then you devise a sort of an experiment where you measure something like the impact on an atom, an electron cloud, or even just, I don't know what that, I don't know what kind of experiment. Maybe like on movements within a jar of water or something. And then another 1,000 humans that are in another room, which put on a piece of paper that they're going to do exactly the same thing at the same time. Like, for instance, sit still the moment their watch beeps and it's 10 o'clock, and they stop moving and they do nothing. They try even not to blink. And they promise they won't do anything, not scratch their nose, not do anything in advance, and see if that affects the reality around them. Like if, the uncertainty in the air changes, the level of uncertainty. I don't know how you would measure it, but anyways, it's that kind of experiments that are testing the influence of the observer on what, is on the outside. And that's really interesting because it's kind of a way to measure our advances in affecting reality, and sort of testing, saying, how powerful are we now? And maybe like in 50 years, you do that with another 1,000 humans, and you realize that the power of the observer is much greater because we've reached a higher level of consciousness and focus and alignment. Now, in experiences also, instead of what is true, then, instead of devising experiences to find an external truth which is eternal, and we're just uncovering it, maybe we'll start to see experimenters actually going in with the intention, and that's really key here, not of discovering what is the truth, but what is a, how should I say this? What is the most interesting next step in the evolution of our knowledge about the universe and our models of the universe, which is in alignment with the whole on structure of the universe. So basically, let me put it this way. It's as if the living cell was swimming around in the ocean, didn't know what rules applied to it or what reality was, and instead of trying to figure out by itself what it is, it actually posed as an intention. I want things to come into my reality that are the next step in my evolutionary process, because I align my intention with bringing into my experience what leads me to manifest the human being, which is a bridge between biology and something else, billions of years into the future. So it's not the living cell saying, oh, I'm just going to do it by trial and error. It's actually setting the human, which is the ultimate sort of evolution of the interactions between cells, as the end goal, and then allows for whatever experiences it attracts to it to be based on that goal. So I'm frequently saying that we have to pass through the pin of a needle, which represents harmony, or the rules for a peaceful and harmonious interaction between all human beings and everything around us, in order to go to the other side, the next dimension. And here, the thing is, in what direction will we go? It's like really going to be chaotic from there, because ultimately, once we reach harmony, well, then anything is permitted, right? In my explanation of things, if we are now in our dream world, so to speak, or in a world of ideas, in our own imagination, but with all of our senses and all the experience that we dragged alongside, like through our bodies and our five senses along the for the ride, then anything, absolutely anything is possible. And you can have the going into a superhero kind of timeline, or going into the aliens timeline, or going into we colonizing the entire galaxy timeline. Who knows? But that's the thing. If there's just too many possibilities, then you get lost, and that can fizzle out and then fall back into chaos. What if you just say, as a science person, I don't know what the best technology is, how the best technology is going to manifest, or if my experiment will work, whether it's fusion reactors or whether it's free energy or whatever from the void. I don't know, but I align my intention with sort of making my experiment succeed if and only if that leads me onto a timeline which reaches the next pin in the needle in the next holon structure, which all of these ultimately have to lead to. And you say, I don't want to miss out on the experience. I just don't want to completely get lost in infinity, basically, in an infinite potential. And so it's the way that you do your experiments, the way that you carry out science. For instance, right now, most of the researchers, whether it's Nassim Haramein or the quantum, whatever, people, I can remember, like Clee Irvin and all those, they still have the intention of finding out what is true versus what is false, instead of having the intention of saying, I have an idea, I don't know if it's true or not, and I'll let the universe make it true based on whether it is an evolutionary step in the right direction for humanity to experience itself in a way that is going to not fizzle out into chaos. So you sort of relinquish that to a higher kind of power. Not a higher power which is dumb and stupid, like an eternal truth which exists there and is just there for to be uncovered because it's just dumb physical rules that emerge out of randomness. But you understand that something higher is more qualified than you to bring into your experience, or to bring you the proof that your model for reality is true. Just like our cells kind of relinquish a big part of their control to our conscious selves, they don't know if it's better or not to cross the street. They don't necessarily know whether it's better to, I don't know, take the airplane or not, go into a car, go and meet friends and have a beer. I mean, they just delegate all that to us, and then they do the best they can. So there is this thing where before scientists were had the intention of uncovering what is true, and of course, once they found out it was true, they wanted to sort of spread that as gospel to the entire human race. Whereas I think the next step in science, the new way we're going to do science, is many people that would devise experiments not with the intention of finding a truth and then imposing it on a lot of other people, but saying, I recognize that the universe is more like an operating system, and I'm going to go through with my ideas and my inspiration because I am a human. I'm designed to have ideas, have inspiration. I'm going to go through with those. But I set my intention to be an antenna for new ideas and experiments which serve a certain purpose, that of benefiting the overall human experience, rather than imposing something that is true regardless of what it's good, whether it's good or bad for humanity. For instance, you uncover nuclear fission and you create nuclear weapons out of it, and you don't give a damn if it's good or not for humanity and for the overall human experience. You're just saying, hey, it's true, so I'm just going to do it. Because why shouldn't I? If it's true. In complete denial of the fact that perhaps there was a different path than the nuclear fission one, a new way of viewing reality, a new way to update the kind of operating system that did not go through nuclear fission and went through something else. Just like, Linux or could turn into Ubuntu or GNOME or plenty of other kind of interfaces and operating systems, even if it's based on the same roots. And so that's a completely new way of doing science, because you're actually not publishing papers saying this is true and I'm convincing everyone. It's more publishing papers saying I've discovered a new way to interact with reality, and this is the experience that is possible from that. What do you think? Like, you bring in sort of ethics. That's how I think you bring ethics and spirituality into science in a way which is not completely denying and getting rid of the structure that we've placed, that we've designed, like, for instance, atoms, molecules, living cells, and all those things. We're not getting rid of all of that. And like I said in previous videos, we're not pretending now that we're just beings of light and that anything is possible, because our consciousnesses are just not ready for that. And this reality would sort of melt away instantly if that we got rid of all those intermediary structures that we've put in place. It's like if you get rid of the bike and the wheels altogether, then good luck riding at all and going anywhere. So I hope that's clear. I hope it's interesting also. I think the different people doing science now that are trying to bridge the gap between science and spirituality will have to come to that realization and make that switch of not publishing with the old paradigm of I now hold the truth, but with a new paradigm of this is the truth, the one relative truth that I've uncovered, which allows us for this kind of experience in the future. What I believe this is going to be made available to humanity. What do you think? Do you think we run the risk of destroying each other because we'll use it irresponsibly? What are the pros and cons? And then discussing with other scientists that have a different way of interacting with reality, and letting people decide. Just like you vote for politicians, maybe we should be allowed also to vote for what kind of experience we want to have within infinity in a conscious way, rather than just leaving it to this process of uncovering an external truth that is static, which of course is an illusion. So I hope you found this interesting, and talk to you in the next video. And don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any.